It's 9 o'clock. Hey,
Hello.
look who I ran into tonight. Hi, everybody. My name is Karen Boite, and I am part of the Ontario Autism Coalition. And from time to time, we host Facebook Lives. These chats are an attempt, just an attempt, to expand on the discussions that we have on our Facebook page. Michael Coteau, Bruce McIntosh, and Angela Brandt are my victims this evening. Michael, thank you for joining us tonight.
My pleasure.
Angela and Bruce are well-known figures in our community, as are you. But to save some time, I'll post your extensive bio and theirs in the feed after our chat. For those of you who don't know, Bruce is was the first president of the Ontario Autism Coalition, and Angela is our current pres. Michael, I just want to jump in because we're going to cover a lot of territory. Is that okay, gang?
Yep.
Go.
Yep, it's okay. Okay. Michael, there are three topics of interest that I would like us to circumnavigate with you tonight. First, how did your experience as a school trustee with the Toronto District School Board, TDSB, inform your eventual role as the big mucky muck as the Minister of Children and Youth Services with the Wynn Government? Then I'd like to move into an examination of the challenges you had in rebuilding the Ontario Autism Program. Small job. It was a small task that you had there in 2016. And the part you played as the fella in charge. And finally, here's the tough part. How is it that clinically prescribed therapy can be yanked away from kids so easily and so quickly? And what could a politician, I don't know, somebody like you, do to prevent this? And what are your thoughts on a national autism strategy? You know, we're just shooting the breeze tonight, right?
Right.
Right. Okay. I just want to click here on my Zoom so I can see you better. Sorry, Michael, for my pause there. So there are two items that I would like to touch on in terms of your experience as a school trustee. I think we could spend an entire night talking about that. But tell me a little bit about what kinds of concerns did parents bring to you, parents of autistic children, when you were a school trustee?
Well, you know, it was an interesting time for me. I got elected to the school board when I was about 30 years old, 29, 30. So I was quite young and very inexperienced when it came to being a politician. And I knocked on doors, 46,000 doors, got elected, and then landed in the job with really just the intention of leveling the playing field when it comes to children and opportunities. And I grew up in Flemington Park, where a lot of young kids, didn't have the opportunities that, a lot of other young people have. So for me, it was not specifically about the kids from Flemington Park. It was about kids in general, just not getting the right type of resources and opportunities to reach their potential. And that's what guided me my whole entire career. And I'll tell you, if you go to the Toronto District School Board or any school board and you really put your heart and soul into the job, it will guide you in any job you do in politics in the future, because it guided me when I was a minister. It was the exact same approach, connecting directly with people rather than, just having bureaucrats and lobbyists, filter through, big ministries. But specifically around, autistic children, there's a mother who came in to see me once at the school board, and she was like, in complete distress. And she was talking to me about ABA therapy and just, ABA training, and the fact that no one at the school board, no one had that training. And, it was interesting because, and I always say to this parent that, it was so funny because, she always thanked me and said, Michael, oh my God, you helped me so much. You helped me. You helped me and my son. And, it's funny, after we launched the new autism program in Ontario, I phoned her and I said to her, it's funny that when you thought I was helping you, you were actually preparing me, to take on a bigger file in the future, because the training I got just, working with one mother and one child at the Toronto District School Board in my area really was the foundation of what I know about ABA and what I know about resistance within a system. And
what kind of resistance did you experience?
The way educators spoke to this parent, the way they dismissed her, the way they pushed her to the side, this parent was not treated properly. And when she came in to see me, she had gone through the entire system without any results, and was again it was like she was distressed. I don't know what other word I would use, but one day I booked an appointment with Chris Spence, the director of education at the time. And can you hear me still?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So we went to go see Chris Spence, and there were a lot of rules in the school boards in regards to who can work where. They're there to protect people's jobs, because big institutions can take advantage of employees, and so they're there for good reasons. But we couldn't get an ABA trained person to actually be an educational assistant to this parent's son because of the rules. So we went in to see Chris Spence, and I'll tell you, he understood the issue, and he set up the first, I would say it was a ABA model classroom at the TDSB based on this situation. So it was right there. It was a parent who was actually, listened to by someone who had some just a bit of political, clout. I could go into a room with her and no one would be disrespectful to her because I was there. Mm-hmm. Then me connecting her to the top person at the board, and then Chris Spence I thought Chris Spence was a really good man, a very passionate person about children, getting opportunity, and he connected with this parent, and the rest was history. It actually worked. And, it was about a leader in the system taking a chance like Chris, and the parent having the drive and not giving up. And I was just kind of like the middleman, I guess. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, many people credit you as being the first person in Toronto to establish an ABA classroom. Bruce, do you have?
Yeah, not me. It was, I would give credit to the parent and to Chris Spence for that. Me just, again, making those connections and making sure that when she went into the room, the parent, people were respectful to her and, and spoke to her properly and took her situation seriously, because it was just a horrible situation.
Mm-hmm. Bruce, what happened to that classroom?
Well, sadly, it lasted, I guess, about 3 years, Michael. I think about 3 years, maybe 4.
When Chris was gone, I think it left.
Yeah, that was the issue. I'm just going to loop back for just a second about why I see it slightly differently. When we work with parents, we always tell them to work their way up in the system. Try and get what you need resolved with the teacher. If that doesn't work, then go to the school staff, the admin staff, the principal or vice principal. Then, if that's not working, you go to the superintendent. And if that doesn't work, you go to the trustee. And I'll be careful about, I was just about to blurt out her name, but what the parent experienced was the stiff arm at every point in that process. And Michael Coteau was the guy who got it and took it up. And I don't believe that she would have ever been in touch with Chris had it not been for you. Right. She has said as much to me that you were her champion. And
yeah, and she's such a wonderful person. I still have a friendship with the parent today. And in fact, and this is where I don't want to get political, but I mean,
you don't want to get political?
In the sense encouraging people to get political, because there's a fine line, but that intersection between advocating and fighting for what you believe in and actual political action. Like this parent, when I was running for school board, came, was with me knocking on doors after, and she supported me. Mm-hmm. And made me successful in getting to where I needed to be to advocate at the provincial level. Mm-hmm. So It's interesting, like political action, like especially like what you do as an organization, it is so important because, you know, there's so many issues out there and people just, unless you're actually shaking the tree hard enough, people are not going to pay attention.
Yeah,
And
that is
I'll tell
true.
you, the best advocacy I've ever seen in the last 10 years in provincial politics was your organization. You know, it is the best political advocacy I've seen, and I've seen some good stuff. And you know, and I think I think even though today we're in a really bad situation, you know, under the Liberal government and the willingness to be involved and to, you know, to be part of change, it's just incredible. If COVID wasn't here today, I think things would be different because the momentum was building again. You know,
We certainly
against the
hope
poor
so. We
government.
certainly hope
Yeah.
so. So, Michael, now that we've buttered you up a little bit by telling the community that you have a long-standing relationship with our community, I want to move into 2016.
Okay.
Bruce, can you describe quickly, Bruce, can you describe the climate of the circumstances under which Michael Coteau was appointed as the Minister of Children and Youth Services and Community Youth Services back in 2016?
Well, Kathleen Wynn was a first-term premier at midterm, and the lessons that we had taught Dalton McGuinty, her predecessor, were forgotten. The government, the minister was Tracy McCharles. She, presumably with the authorization of the centre, moved to reinstitute an age cutoff, give the children that were either in service or on the wait list that were above that age cutoff a pat on the head and $8,000, and thank you very much, be on your way, and then focus on younger children with autism, and who would have aged out had they, you know, when they hit 5, whether they'd had 6 months or 2 years of therapy. We kind of went berserk, and we turned up the heat. We made it very uncomfortable, but that's what needed to happen because it was a terrible mistake. So at some point, and I don't honestly remember the timing of how, I think, Michael, you were appointed in May?
I think it was May or June, somewhere around there. Yeah.
Well, I do remember that you made the announcement of the new installment program in, I guess, early July. And I
That's
remember
right.
my daughter counted up that it was 92 days from your swearing into that announcement.
Yeah.
Michael turned the ship.
So it was 92 days from the time that the program was canceled for kids over the age of 5.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was 92 days to turn that ship around.
June 13th, I took on the post. I just checked.
There you go.
Just curious, Bruce, how many days has it been since the Ontario Autism Program was blown to smithereens?
I can remember years much more easily, more than 2.
More than 2 years versus 90 days. Michael, I want to quote you from a conversation that you had with me a couple of years ago. It was one of the first things that you said.
I told you before this, the internet never forgets.
So this is what you said to me, Michael. This was a challenge.
Explain what was the context of where were we when I said this?
We were in your office in 2019. And we were doing another Facebook Live, kind of like this one.
Oh, right, that's right.
And
okay.
And I had a bunch of questions from the community that I read to you. I might have cried and lost my composure. I'm sorry about that. I'm much cooler now. But so I had a look at that video, and I would just want to pull something that you said. You said this was a challenge that was so complex. It was government upon government upon government. It was school boards, service providers, and all these different elements that for years and years were not working together.
Yeah. You know, one of the things that, and Bruce, we talked about this often, you know, there was the I guess the low hanging fruit, meaning, you know, fix the autism program so kids are getting resources to take, you know, specific, you know, to get the therapy they needed. But then there was a next layer of like, you know, like I looked at, for example, recreation programs in Ontario, like municipal recreation programs, and the fact that, you know, some kids, you know, there weren't programs for some kids, you know, or the research that was taking place, or nutritional services. You know, just there's so many different elements that were disconnected, you know, between, you know, services that help, you know, children in general. And I always thought that, you know, it would be so good to bring everyone together and I always talked about like a collective impact model where people are forced to work together in order to, you know, to achieve the best goals for young kids. But you know, on top of that, you know, governments came in and changed things, and it's just a disconnected system. And even more so today, the system is just not designed to work with each other and get the best outcomes for children in general. And that's a in general, like I'm talking about all kids. You know, you think about like, you know, even sports and recreation programs, the fact that, you know, amateur sports has no connection to education, like, you know, things like that, or mental health services, no connection to education. You know, there's a way we can, you know, make sure that, you know, organized labor, jobs are protected, and still like work together as a group to get the best outcomes for kids, especially the kids that need the most help.
How many different stakeholders did you have to meet with in order to get the train back on the tracks?
Specifically for the OAP?
Yeah.
You know, there were a lot of different players, and it's interesting. Even, well, let's be honest, even the folks that are involved in the autism sector, you know, sometimes have different perspectives and approaches, right? So, you know, you've got to even work within that you know, but for me, just bringing an advisory committee together with different perspectives, from researchers to parents, you know, to practitioners, to, you know, to people within, you know, or government, or, you know, different service providers, bringing them into one room makes a difference from the start. But you also have to be able to connect to people who are in it for the right reason and start to trust people. And, you know, there's not enough of that in politics. But I would say and Bruce, you'll probably agree with this, that the best thing I ever did, which is not done in government, is I actually, you know, pulled back the curtains, you know, revealed the problem, you know, had the problem, you know, placed on the table, and then asked for help. And, you know, remove the wall between, you know, stakeholders and the bureaucrats, and actually ask them to start to work together. You have to remember that the senior manager, who was it, Sarah,
Yes.
the senior bureaucrat who had the file, like she was doing like town halls with me. Like, could you imagine in a Doug Ford government, you know, the manager for autism services being on a town hall meeting, answering questions directly with the minister? Unheard of, you know, but we did that because I think that, you know, that their voices are important as well. And let's be honest, let's be honest, let's make some mistakes. Let's not be afraid to make mistakes, and let's admit when we're wrong. And I'll tell you, you'll get the trust of people in politics if you actually, you know, let them sit at the table and show them what the problem is. Like we're Ontarians, we're Canadians. You know, we want to make sure that, you know, we're doing what's in the best interest of this country, of this province, and we can do it together. And there's not too much of that happening in politics in Ontario today.
Angela, I promise to bring you in soon, Angela. Bruce, it's safe to say the OAC had some pretty unprecedented access at that time.
We did. That was a relationship that developed over time. I mean, before I understood, Michael, that you were the trustee that had helped with the ABA classroom, I got a call from that mom when it was announced that you were being sworn in, and she was absolutely ecstatic. I, on the other hand, with some very hard-won cynicism, okay, you know, yeah, there's
you had your gloves on, Bruce.
We've broken in new ministers before, you know, I've done it a few times now, and yeah, we'll see. And she just, you'll love him, right? Well, a couple of phone calls later, and this is the day that you were sworn in, you called me. Now, I was in the car on the way out to a meeting at Erin Oak with a mom with Bob Delaney. He was going to apologize. He'd called the police on her.
I remember that. Yeah,
that was a very unpleasant episode. But we were on the phone for probably an hour. It might have been more. I was breathtaking. We always had to pound on the door. You know, here we are, the OAC, thousands of people across the province. We'd like a meeting with the minister. We'll get back to you. And this guy picked up the phone and called me. And it was a frank exchange of views.
Angela, as Prez, what kind of access do you have to the ministry?
It's very minimal. I actually do have a meeting with a couple bureaucrats next week, but the last meeting we had was several months ago, and the conversations are very opaque. There's not a lot of transparency. A lot of the information that is provided to us is already public. The only time that we get insight into anything is us having to read between the lines. Nothing is ever explicit. And so if it's not written, we can't share it with our members, unfortunately, because it could change at any moment. But I have a question for Michael, if you don't mind.
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
He's talking about having the bureaucrats at the town halls and, pulling back that curtain. I want to know how you did it, Michael. How did you do it? How did you get the bureaucrats to participate like that? Because that seems like a very, very daunting task.
Mm-hmm.
So I had a pretty cool deputy minister. There's some deputy ministers that get into the job and they only want the minister to deal directly with the deputy minister and not go anywhere below that layer. We had a deputy minister that trusted, that trusted our senior staff. And, I think here's the problem in politics. Like, bureaucrats are suspicious of politicians because politicians will usually, make sure that, they're the ones that are held in the best light. And if anything goes wrong, they'll blame the bureaucrats and vice versa. Often, bureaucrats are not going to take the heat for something, silly or unprofessional that the politicians say. If you can get to a stage right from the beginning where there's a respect factor in play, where you can actually have mutual respect and understand boundaries, like we had that. And I think that's the first. I wasn't there to play politics, and I think the deputy minister understood that. And when we went in there, you have to also remember that we had a brand new political staff in the office. So when you're a minister, you have 15 political staff, and we had a new deputy minister. You have to remember the folks that were in those positions before were for years in those positions, and everything was locked up. Everyone was fitted into their spots. So I had a fresh start, and we never did anything, I think, that would have upset the deputy minister, and vice versa. So we had that. And when you're a minister, you have, to a certain degree, you have complete control of the ministry. As long as you're not going past your mandate letters. So Kathleen would say to me, the premier, Michael, you know what you're supposed to do, just go and do it. And, make sure it's, make sure it's interesting. Kathleen Wynn would say this, and this, I have to give props to Kathleen Wynn. She's an incredible politician. And I'll tell you why. When we were ministers, she would say, don't be afraid to talk. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. These files. To her ministers, go out there and actually be who you are. You will never find modern day government, leaders speaking that way. So she gave me, basically the authority, the comfort level to go out and try to do things the right way based on my values, what I've learned, and not to be afraid of messing up, to actually try to get it done. And I think that was a big part of getting the bureaucrats involved. And, I'll have to say this, and I'm taking way too long here, but you have to remember that governments in general they're pretty new concept, right? With 1930s, like modern government, it's not too old. Like this is a new concept that, we've put in place, the modern political bureaucratic system. So, but remember the whole nature of government, and the clerks and the function of the secretary of cabinet, and that function is to preserve tradition and the methods of doing things. So it's really hard to make change. It's hard to change systems because the system itself is there to preserve what it has. In some cases, especially in the legislature, that's its job, to preserve the tradition of the House. So, so we need to keep that in mind, that, it is hard for systems to change, but if you've got some people who are willing to be a bit brave and not to be afraid to make mistakes, and, even the bureaucrat who was on the call with us, Sarah, like, she was afraid to this. She's like, no one's ever done this before. And she was afraid. And I said, like, whatever you do, it's going to be fine. Like, no matter what you say, I have your back.
It was certainly interesting watching you work. I don't know if you're aware of what a figure you were in our community as people were watching you maneuver. It's kind of, for some of our parents, it was like watching a sports team. They pay so much attention to the minute details of your work. Speaking of which, with bureaucrats, Bruce, I can recall you talking about a relational shift that happened when it came to guidelines and installments with Michael, that maybe Michael might have been a little naive as to how much the bureaucrats were on his side.
Well, what happened was that we got to the 6-week mark after Michael had made the announcement about the installment program. And just so that people understand what I'm talking about when I say that, the government, Michael's first move was to reinstate all of the children who had been bumped off because of the age 5 cutoff, off the wait list or out of service, to reinstate them with fully funded therapy. And they were, the way it worked was that they would be given $10,000 to work with, and a soft cap, it was called, so that might last you for 2 months, 3 months, 4 months. But when it was used up, you brought your invoices back and you were advanced another installment. There wasn't a strict rule on pricing for services. So you might get a higher cost per hour and consequently fewer hours, or you might get a better cost per hour and be able to stretch the 10,000 out longer. This was magical. This was exactly the sort of thing that we had been asking for. I mean, as much as we kind of helped with some of the communications and advice, and I remember sitting down with James and Jessica and a couple of other people looking at, how it should actually work, and then saying on the front of the Toronto Star it was an awesome victory, but it really was. I mean, it was what we had been asking for. It took 6 weeks to get the guidelines for those installments published. And the day that it happened, I had been getting told for probably 2 or 3 weeks, oh, it's in approvals. Well, it's being edited. We'll have it out, real soon now, as the software industry says. And it just wasn't coming. And so we we unleashed our membership.
My eyes are glazing over a little bit, Bruce. Maybe I shouldn't have asked that question. It's so inside baseball, I think, we're putting everybody to sleep.
They released the guidelines, and a couple of weeks later, Michael and I had a conversation about why did it take that long? It's only like, if you took all the window dressing off, it was about 5 pages of actual words.
I remember that.
6 weeks. And my response was, well, Minister, you have to understand that the bureaucrats aren't always here to help you. And I've been through that process with a minister. I think every minister goes through it at some point in their career. Sadly, that was a bit of the turning point for Michael.
Yeah.
But
Can I
he
add to
got
that? Can
there
I
was
just
a
add a little
blockage.
part to that, Bruce? It was
Yeah,
interesting
please.
because when I first got to the file, they said that the new OAP program would take 2 years to develop. I don't know if you remember this, Bruce. They told me it would take
I
2
do.
years. So I said, you need to cut it in half and then take away some. They're like, what are you talking about? I'm like, just get it done. Like, figure it out. And they figured it out. So, you know, I think when there's political will and you got people on board who are willing to, like, you give them the resources necessary, you can line things up and move things quickly. And this is what I don't understand about, you know, Todd Smith and, you know, the Ford government. Like, why is it taking so long? This to me seems intentional at this point.
Yes.
2 years,
Angela,
2 months, and 2 days
okay, that's
later.
enough, Bruce. That's enough out of you. Angela, a couple of years ago, Todd Smith toured Ontario and made a lot of promises to parents. What did he communicate to parents during that tour?
Well,
2 years ago.
I did see him twice on the tour. I saw him in Belleville and in Toronto. And interestingly enough, one of the things he communicated was that he understood that, you know, once you met a child or a person on the spectrum, you've met one person on the spectrum, that they're all different and they all require different needs. He continued to communicate that and say that the province was going to build a needs-based program and that he was listening to stakeholders. You know, and on this tour, he went to different parts of the province. He went to the north, you know, and they require very specific types of services, different from different regions, and rural as well as French speaking and all those things. And he communicated that that's what he was going to do. And there was an advisory panel in place. He was going to follow the directions, all of the recommendations in the report. And, you know, the tour happened in the summer of 2019. So he actually promised that the advisory report would be ready at the end of summer of 2019. It actually became available at the end of October. And then once he had the advisory panel report, he said he was going to follow all of the recommendations for a needs-based program.
Right.
We're still waiting.
Michael, what was it like to see your plan blown to smithereens?
You know, when Lisa MacLeod came in, it was right away, you know, there was, you know, she was almost defiant in a way, like, you know, this is like, you know, I've heard conservatives take, like, for example, you know, programs for young people, like Focus on Youth, saying it's a, you know, a liberal, you know, what did they call it? A liberal pet project. So the ideology and the hate for the Liberal Party was so extreme that anything, you know, this is the sad part about it, anything that was good that came out of the government that was associated with the Liberals, it's like they just wanted to just destroy it for the sake of destroying it because it was a Liberal thing. You know, I thought, okay, you know, that, you know, maybe tone down a bit. We saw Doug Ford change a bit, you know, after his numbers went so low. And then Todd Smith came in and I was, you know, I was optimistic about Todd. And, you know, if you notice the first few months of Todd being on the job, I didn't say anything critical of him. You know, I asked him if I offered to help. I actually sent him recommendations. And, you know, I just thought maybe he'd be different because, you know, Todd is actually, like, if you sit down and talk to him, even with Lisa, like one-on-one, these are, you know, they seem like just good, normal people who want to do good. But for some reason, you know, it's like they're getting instructions, you know, to do what they're doing or something, because it's just not reasonable. It's not logical. It doesn't make any sense when you apparently double the funding for autism, and the service that you're providing is so unaligned with what the needs are. It just doesn't make sense. It actually does not make sense. Like, I can't figure it out.
Bruce and Angela, do you see any parallels between Michael Coteau, I'm sorry to talk about you in front of you, Michael, replacing Tracy McCharles in the Liberal government, and Todd Smith's appointment replacing Lisa MacLeod?
I definitely see a parallel. Tracy McCharles came off as very forceful, and she wasn't very well liked. And for the image, Michael was brought in, and hopefully to quell some of the issues in the autism community. And very, very similar, you know, McLeod, she was very kind of hot-headed, and, you know, they brought Todd Smith in, who is much more level-headed on the surface, seems generally kinder on the surface. So I think there is a very, very strong parallel in terms of the ministry replacement, or the minister replacement. However, Todd Smith definitely did not fill the shoes that Coteau had. That in terms of his role, Smith is not able to live up to what this government had promised, whereas Coteau actually did.
Yeah, Michael, do you think the implementation of Todd Smith was a stall? Like, what's going on in,
like I said, you know,
his mind?
Todd's a nice guy. You know, if I see Todd, I stop and I speak to him, and we've always had that relationship for the last decade.
Yeah.
You know, he's always been a nice guy. I don't know. It's like,
well, the funny thing is we don't care if he's a nice guy or not.
Yeah. No,
You
but
know,
I mean, that's the point, right? Like, I mean, the
Yeah.
point is that, you know, by putting in a nice guy doesn't, as we can tell, like, I just thought maybe, you know, he would be, remember, okay, we have to go back a bit. Remember with Lisa McLeod, do you remember the things she was saying, like, to, was it on Taba, and, you know, things she was saying to people?
Egregious.
It was rough, like, you know, so, you know, I thought Todd coming in, well, he's never going to take that type of attitude. Like, he would never, you know, speak to someone like that. And, you know, it's just, it's almost worse, because it's like, you know, when you do something with a smile on your face and you can make claims that, you know, what did he say a few weeks ago when I asked him a question, that it was, his program was the golden standard?
The gold standard.
The gold standard. Like, you know, like, it's like he's sitting there and he's speaking a certain way, and you're like, what is going on here? So you know, I just think that when, you know, at least with Lisa, you understood what you were gonna get, right? With Todd,
Yes.
you know, he does it with a smile, and you know, it's just.
But do you feel that he believes it, or do you feel that he knows what he's doing is wrong?
I think Todd Smith knows exactly what Todd Smith is doing. There's no question, and we know you cannot give. What is the over 7 years old? What is it? 5K?
Yeah. Oh, over 6, yeah.
Over 6, 5. You cannot give a young person who, you know, who needs $100K a year, $5,000, and expect them to actually do well in life. It's just outrageous. And that one fact alone, you know, says everything.
I may be overstepping here, but it did seem to me that when we were protesting you, Michael, it was pretty easy to shame you, you know, and we don't seem to be able to embarrass this government. We don't seem to be.
Yeah. You know what? It's not like the protesting, you know, shamed me or shamed like, and I know when you say me, you're probably thinking like, you know, the government as a whole.
I am. I'm sorry. You're a representative of the.
No, that's what I got. But
yeah,
I don't think that was the case. I honestly believe. Let's go back to Tracy McCharles and Kathleen Wynn. I have no question in my mind that they actually believed, based on the expert advice they were getting, that they were doing the right thing. There was no question in my mind that Kathleen Wynn, you know, looked at that plan that was presented to her by experts and said, okay, if this is the expert plan, let's do this. Let's get this right. Because she talked about, you know, the autism file, being a former school board trustee for years. She believes in equity. She believes in fairness, and she believes in giving kids, you know, the best start possible. I think what happened was the information that was presented in a way that made it seem like everyone thought it was the best approach. And when, you know, it hit the fan, that was not the case. And, you know,
Well,
it was,
some
I could
people may
still,
say, Michael, that the Liberal government co-opted a lot of professionals and had them sign gag orders and then
yeah,
release their plan, you know?
I don't know, but I have to believe, I have to believe that this was, the approach that they were taking was to make things better, not make things worse. And when we saw the protesting start and I got the phone call to take over the file,
Mhm,
the premier said to me, Michael, we need to make this right.
mhm, mhm,
So I don't think it
mhm,
was ever about public shaming. I think it
mhm.
was about, what are our values as politicians, as
Yes.
liberals. And you feel shame if you're in charge. And I said this to someone on the phone today. Think about
Mhm,
this. Imagine you're in charge of a corporation, the biggest corporation in the province. Okay, so you
mhm,
have access to 160, 170 billion dollars. Okay, and on top of it, you can change laws anytime you want.
mhm,
Think about that power for a second.
mhm.
And you're sitting in a room with 25, 26 people and you can make decisions. Kathleen, Wynn, myself, we know that if you're in a position of that much power, that you better be doing what's best, for children, because you've got a short window to do so. And the shame would come by not delivering on those types of
So
those best decisions.
how is it that we can't embarrass this crew? You know, the premier of Ontario says, my heart goes out to children with autism, not his wallet, but his heart. And yet
Can I tell
they're
you why? And
getting
I know
no
Bruce wants to
traction at
jump in. And
all. Tell
I'll give
me.
you the perfect reason. I think this conservative government believes that people like us, people who are, I shouldn't say us, like the people who are part of the sector are their employees versus liberals who always saw them as partners. And that's the difference. The teachers to the conservatives are employees. The sector who delivers autism services, they're employees. They see them like they're in charge versus liberals. Kathleen Wynne doesn't look at a teacher and say, I'm your boss. She looks at them and says, they're partners in building a better society for kids. It's the same way coming from the school board. That's the way I've always looked at it. So I think that's the reason why
Bruce, you look
they
like you
know
wanted to
best.
add something, Bruce.
Well, I was just reflecting on a couple of the bits of conversation that we've had leading up to this point.
Mhm.
And that sort of the bureaucrats aren't necessarily the minister's friend. The move that Lisa MacLeod made was on a slide deck of options that was presented to Michael's advisory committee. And it was immediately and instantly rejected by practitioners, service providers, the parents, everybody. Just no, because it's exactly not the right thing. But it's an easy thing for the bureaucrats. And it's also a nice thing for the minister, because whatever other problems there may be in the system, the wait list was the one that we always had to hold their feet to the fire. So if you got rid of the wait list, you get rid of your single biggest PR problem, right? Now, it took us a while, but we got around that. But here's the other thing. When they told Michael that it was going to take 2 years, right now, it's 2 years, 2 months, and 2 days. These things have a way of coming true if the minister isn't ready to push back and hard.
That's a good point, Bruce.
And lo and behold, here we are still with Lisa's plan. It's just, I don't think they care enough to actually push back.
Mhm.
I don't think they give a damn.
So,
I think
Bruce,
would
you say, Bruce, that, yeah, would you actually say, Bruce, that you think it's just a lack of experience?
A little bit, but I also know that there was experience. And Tim Porter, the fellow who was Lisa MacLeod's chief of staff, he worked for Rusty Baird years and years ago when Rusty was at Comtalk, and he knew the autism file, and he knew exactly what he was doing. I don't think it was, but this is the guy who said, on Twitter, if parents want the gold standard, they're going to have to mortgage their house. And he said it with not a care in the world about how badly that sounded. He was an arrogant SOB. He told
We've got
Laura,
15 minutes left, Bruce.
There's a
few.
I just want to say I am
Yes.
with Bruce. It has nothing to do with experience. It has everything to do with will.
A political
Yeah, right.
will. I think Michael mentioned a political will, didn't he,
Yeah.
earlier on in this conversation? So how the heck can we prevent therapies being yanked away so quickly from kids? Can a politician do anything about that? We've had this happen twice in a very short period of time.
I always say to folks that don't rely on your politician to deliver the program. You got to rely on yourself and your community. People need to realize that getting involved, and I don't care what political party it is, get involved in the political process, because these are the folks that make decisions in your community. Get involved at the local level. And if you don't want to join a political party, join, an organization like yours. If you don't want to join an organization like yours, well, at least show up to the protesting, at least book a meeting with the politician, bring your child into the meeting. You have to be involved. And it's not just with kids with autism. I'm talking about every issue that matters in this province when it comes to building a better Ontario. People need to be involved, and sometimes joining a political party is hard to stomach. So it's not for everyone. But I mean, if you can stomach it, then you should get involved, and you should hold people accountable from within those structures rather than showing up at Queen's Park. That's showing up at Queen's Park is the very end of the process.
How can a parent?
So, Karen, I'm just going to ask a question. Yes. Sorry, just to add to that, what can we do now in a pandemic?
I think you still need to book meetings with your member of provincial parliament, your city councillors. This is, to me, an issue that all politicians should be aware of. So book meetings with your politicians, your school board trustees, etc. Number two, support the cause. Like if you do have time and energy, it doesn't mean you have to write a big check. You can make phone calls. You can find out what the local organization's doing and participate in that process. And I think the third thing is just share information. Sharing. I'll give you a perfect example. I had a phone call with a friend today, and he told me, he's pretty much a conservative. He hates paying taxes. This guy I went to university with, he's made some money and he hates paying taxes. You know what he said to me? I don't mind paying taxes when it comes to kids with autism. This is out of the blue. He just said that. And he doesn't even know the extent of the work I did, on the file. But he says, when it comes to like paying taxes to help kids, kids with autism, kids for after school programs, I'm fine with that, but don't waste my money. So most people, regardless of their political view, would support children and the betterment of kids. So everyone's on side. It's just making them realize, who we're against. Or who we're up against.
Why do you suppose it is that the Ontario Autism Program is housed within a social service industry, the people who deliver welfare, as opposed to the health ministry or even an education ministry?
It's actually
is it in the wrong place?
No, it's in the children. It's in children and community social services. It's actually the part of the children's division, children and youth division. Still, am I right, Bruce?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's still in the children. But there's a big argument to move it into health, right? Mm-hmm. There's a big argument out there. There's a lot of people advocating for that. And that's an interesting question. Youth mental health, it was in children youth services. And I used to go to the Minister of Health, the Premier, and the Deputy constantly saying, why is this file in children youth services? Like it should be in healthcare. Like, what is it doing here? I can understand corrections. Youth detention was in youth because obviously, for obvious reasons, you've got to bring that child lens to, I think, the justice system. But when it comes to anything that's connected to health, period, I think that there's a conversation that needs to take place, but it can't just be kids with autism. It has to be kids with any type of challenge in front of them, and resources that can be applied to reach their potential. Children with all forms of physical disabilities, so there needs to be a big conversation about children in general and where those resources come from and which ministry is responsible for. Anyone under 18 in this province that needs help should get help, period. Like anyone.
If these services were, for example, moved to the Ministry of Health, would they be more protected?
You know what? I don't know enough about how the Ministry of Health works. But I do know that if there's political will to get something done, it can happen. And maybe if it's through an OHIP card versus the stroke of a pen from a bureaucrat, it will just help protect young people more.
Yes,
a little bit of backstory on that. Before the program began in 1999, and there's transcript court testimony on this issue as a result of a class action suit that happened. But there were meetings between the staff at the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Health, and what was then COMSOC, Community and Social Services. And they actually met to come up with a name for the program that would not sound as though it belonged under education or health. The reason is because when it was launched, there was absolutely no epidemiological research on exactly what the uptake would be. No one knew how much it would cost. And so the government was absolutely terrified of launching this potential monster, because if you walk into a hospital, you are guaranteed to get healthcare. If you walk into a school in Ontario, you are guaranteed to get an education. But if you walk into community and social services, ain't necessarily so. There can be funding shortages, there can be wait lists. It is much, much easier to tamper with the social services budget than it is at health or education. And so that's what they did.
Angela.
And that's the key word, Bruce, budget.
Yes, that is the key word. And Angela, I wanted to ask you a little bit about money. We're really running out of time. But would you like to quickly let us know about some of the shortfalls of spending that you've discovered already?
Well, Michael mentioned that this government said they doubled the budget, and they still can't deliver. I mean, you also said that they're not speaking with their checkbook, but technically they kind of are. They just aren't speaking with their heart. The previous fiscal year, we know that they underspent by 174 million. That's almost 1/3 of the budget, right? The budget was 608 million for the previous fiscal year. Because of that shortfall, Todd Smith said that he was going to spend 1.2 billion over 2 years, over 2 fiscal years. I had a quick look at the Q3 spending report from the FAO, and up until Q3, they spent, I wrote it down, but I can't find it, somewhere around 400 million. So here it is. Oh, they spent almost 472 million up to Q3. But
what's
there was
Q3, Angela? Angela, what's Q3?
Sorry, Q3. So of this year, it's 3/4 of the spending.
Where's the money going?
Well,
the $174 million question, Michael Coteau.
Here's my theory. Here's my theory.
This might be a little bit inside baseball because I have the dollar amounts for each quarter for this year. And I don't know if you want to hear it, Michael, but first quarter, they spent 80K.
80 million.
80 million, sorry, 80 mil. Second quarter, they spent 269 mil. And third quarter, they spent 123. So why is second quarter so high? What I heard from the ministry, and I'll say this, even though this is not confirmed, but I did hear this directly from Jennifer Morris, and I'm not going to hide it, that the 174 million that was accrued from previous fiscal year, for those that don't know what accrual means, it just means transferring from one year to the next, was lumped into Q2. So even though it appears they've spent 470 million this year so far, there might be monies that will not be allowed again. Like last year, that 174 million, they tried to push it into the budget, but it was not allowed. So
Yeah,
I suspect,
interesting.
yeah, so this year I suspect there's going to be spending not allowed again. And even if it is allowed, he's still short by 200 million in that 1.2 billion.
You know what my theory is? And I'd love someone to, like, we're going to look into this, but I think, because I remember the Minister of Education talking a lot about how much they're spending on the autism file. I think they've bundled everything you spend, from speech and language to, rehabilitate, whatever, camps, everything. And they've taken all the money and they've put it into like one bundle as an actual cost. Anything that the ministry can spend, I think that's what they've done, and I would really like to see that breakdown. Does it actually break down the amounts that you're talking about?
Not in the FAO.
Yeah.
Hopefully, it'll take several months after the end of the fiscal year, but hopefully the Auditor General, that report will be able to provide us more insight. But by that point,
We'll be in an election.
And we'll be in an election, exactly.
Well, that's a perfect topic for another show. Where
It's
did
funny
the money
that
go?
it's funny that you mentioned that. We're coming
What an
to
amazing
the end
segue.
of our hour. We're coming to the end of our hour. And before we let you off the hook, Michael, we hear that you're leaving us. You're leaving provincial politics to go and fight it out with the feds. But before you go, do you have thoughts about a national autism strategy, and would you like to discuss that on another
I would love to.
Facebook Live?
Yeah, I'd love to. And I don't think, I think just the three things that I've always stressed, the coordination of standards across the country, or at least setting standards, the sharing of best practices, and building a national strategy. I think, it's not a very expensive thing to do, to pull those three together and to leverage the provinces to actually be on the same, aspiring to the same goals. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity there. Can I take my last minute and just say something completely
Please, it's not
unrelated
TV.
to that?
It's not
Yeah.
TV. We can go over the hour, by the way. We're not holding a timer to you, but yeah.
I just want to say that, there's been, throughout the conversation, there's been a lot of, things said that, that cast the work I've done in a positive light. And I just want to say that, I think people have to remember that, I'm a politician who is elected, and I get paid for this work. Like, I get a paycheck to build good policy, and to create legislation, and to manage things. And as a minister, to run a ministry. That was my job, but I just want to thank, the folks on the call. And I want to thank Bruce and the whole group that was there, that helped guided me, because, these are folks that are not getting paid. They're doing it because they believe in it, and they're fighting for it. And I think people need to recognize the amount of work that goes into this. Like the fact that I always say Bruce, Bruce and like the whole group that was there helping me. These are folks that believe in this stuff, and are there. And I just want to say thank you, because I couldn't have done any of these things, to try to make the file a bit better without the help of so many people. So I just want to say thank you, and I want people on listening to recognize the outstanding work that took place during that time period, and it mainly because it was, because of people like Bruce and his team.
You realize, of course, now that Bruce will be insufferable for the rest of the month.
Karen, I was insufferable before. Let me just say
You're telling me.
response.
You're telling me.
It's really easy to work hard at something when you've got a solid partner who's actually
Oh
working
my
with you.
God, here we go. Okay, Michael,
No,
I have one
that
more
is
question.
what it was.
Okay,
All
enough
right.
with the bromance. Let's move on.
Enough. Hey, did you know that the first thing Michael said when we started the Zoom was, Bruce, you look really nice tonight.
That's true.
The first thing
No,
he said.
I didn't say he looked nice. I said, Bruce, you look great.
You look great. You look great. Nothing about Angela and I. Nothing. Okay. May I ask one more question, Michael Coteau, before we say goodnight?
Of course.
So what do you know now that you didn't know when you were a school trustee about services for autistic people? What do you know now about us and our community?
You know, I only have a couple of cousins in Ontario, like in Canada, and one of them is nonverbal autistic. You know, my cousin. I grew up with him, right? And you know, he's the nicest young man. I always see him as a young man because we grew up and spent a lot of time as young people together. And you know, I saw him recently, and you know, he is you know, he's the nicest guy. And you know, I kind of had that perspective, you know, and that was my motivation for a long time. But then working with parents and seeing the challenges that they go through, like, you know, especially, you know, when I met that one parent at the school board, and then, you know, over the years, meeting so many more parents, you know, across the province and listening to their stories, I just sometimes can't believe how challenging, you know, it is for parents who are trying to do the best they can, you know, without the supports that, you know, that they need, and really sacrificing so much of their, you know, their life and their time, you know, and beyond, you know, just you know, the first 18, 21 years. But I mean, this is a lifetime commitment. You know, just watching the strength of some of these folks, it's just, to me, that is, you know, probably the most amazing thing, because for some reason, even though the challenges are there, and of course they love their family and their kids, you know, and just the challenges are so extreme sometimes, you know, especially if you're a single parent, the fact that they are optimistic and they still look, you know, into the future to propose solutions and to look to work with people like myself, that I think that's the amazing part of the story.
Thank you so much for your time, Michael. I
Yeah.
hope you don't mind that I've been calling you Michael this whole time, and not
Next time,
Mr.
Mr.
Coteau.
Michael.
Mr. Michael. Mr.
Actually,
Michael.
the
We-
first
It
time
took me months to stop calling him minister.
Actually,
Yeah,
You know,
the
I know.
Can I
The
tell you
first-
one little thing that a
Please.
former minister said to me? He
Please.
said, when you become a minister, you go from nobody to Mr. Nobody.
Well, we know how you feel. We know how you feel.
Well,
Thank
I
you
was
so
gonna
much.
say- I was
Yes,
just going to say, the first time I met you, Michael, you may not remember, it was many, many years ago, and I addressed you as Minister Coteau, and you said, no, call me Michael. So
Yeah.
many years later, that's all. And I actually told you to call me Angela, and you giggled.
all right, here we go. Listen, for the record, the Ontario Autism Coalition is a nonpartisan organization. President Angela Brandt, former President Bruce McIntosh. Thank you so much for all of your time this evening. We'd love to do this again, Mr. Coteau, Mr. Michael, if you're willing.
Yeah. Mr.
We'll contact your people, and
that means you'll call me, right?
That's right. We're sorry to see you leaving the political landscape of the province. Many in our community had high hopes for your future in our province, and we wish you all the best.
I never left the school
to
board,
be
even though I
continued.
went. Yeah, well, sorry to interrupt you. I
That's
never
all right.
left the school board when I went to the province, and I'll never leave the province if I end up in the federal parliament.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
we'd like to hear more. We certainly would like to
Okay.
hear more. Yes, Bruce, National Autism Strategy discussion.
100%.
Yeah, Angela, are you in?
I'm in.
Michael, can I get you to say yes
Yeah,
on
absolutely.
the spot? Okay, I'm going to let you go. Wonderful. Thank you
Thank you.
again,
Thank you for the
everybody.
opportunity.
It's our pleasure. And I'm going to turn off the live feed in a very unceremonious way, but I'll stay on the Zoom.
Let's all wave.
Goodbye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks for joining us.